Wall and guarding a queen.
Hello, friends.
Hello.
Sod called us
Guten
nerds.
Abend.
Sod called us nerds. I just want to. I will mention that. But I was like, you wish you were that cool to be here. Anyways, okay. We are in week 3 of group meeting. Woo! Chapter 5 and chapter 6 of The Hobbit. Okay. I was telling them before we got started, for everybody else that joined in. Hi, everybody that joined in. I don't know if it was the week that I was having, but chapter 5 and chapter 6 were a struggle.
You ain't wrong.
Like, they were a little, like, I don't know if it was, I mean, I felt like they were very important, because obviously chapter 5, we get, like, official introduction of Gollum and, like, the world he lives in, and obviously the ring is introduced, what, right at the end of chapter, or right at the beginning of chapter 5? Or at the end of chapter, yeah. I even marked it where it was like, wait, where'd it go? It was a turning point in his career, but he did not know it. You know, when he found the ring and stuff. So it's like, obviously very important chapters, but for whatever reason, I struggled a little bit to read them. But I mean, I did it. I done did it. And I'm not usually a riddle person as well, but like reading through the riddles and then hearing the answer and then rereading the riddles, I was like, oh, that makes sense. So then what was even chapter 6? I had to reread chapter 6 I had to read chapter 6 on Sunday and reread chapter 5. Oh, and yeah, we'll get there, but yeah, that was cool. Okay. Begin. Chapter 5. Anybody have any like favorite parts? Anything they like really liked? Anything?
I will say the one thing that kind of I read and then that kind of had to reframe my mind about is Gollum refers to himself as my precious, not the ring. And everything about the movies makes it sound like my precious is how he refers to the ring. Where in here it's like, no, the ring is his birthday present, right? That's how he refers to that. So when he's saying my precious, he's not calling the ring as precious. And I probably had heard that before and knew it, but that was like, oh, wait a minute. That's, you know, the movies are all the precious is the ring. And they even show everyone else saying my precious, they're talking about the ring. But that is not what this says at all.
I did pick up on that as well and found that very interesting. Because I think Tolkien also mentions it, that he refers to it like that because he's only used to talking to himself. Isn't that also mentioned in that same kind of line?
Yeah.
And is that he's just so used to talking to himself because he lives alone, obviously. And you know, even the goblins leave him alone unless somebody wanders down there to dare go get a fish, right? It's like he's down there alone, you know. So yeah, I did find that very interesting as well. And it's also interesting, like I'm just scanning like over some of my stickies and stuff, is that Bilbo even says that this area, like the going down the tunnels and stuff to where Gollum is that like Bilbo was in what is called a tight place, but it's like, okay, but to a hobbit, you know, it's like it would be a tight space to us to just be in one of you know, like in their house, right? Just like we saw in the movies where Gandalf is in the house and he's having to like hunch over and everything. But it's like for a hobbit to be considered in a tight place, it's like, oof, like, ugh, you know, how tiny are we talking here?
And in that part too, he definitely got back into narrator mode. He's like, Now remember, dear reader, it's not so funny for
Yes.
for him as it would have been for you or me. So he's like
Yes.
back in straight narration mode there.
And at least for me, at the very end of that page, I should not have liked to have been in Mr. Baggins's place.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. It was just that's a good point. Is he does flip there, talking about it and everything, and yeah.
No, it is just weird how it's interspersed right throughout the story, so it's not constant, but there are places where, because I don't think you don't get that at all from the Lord of the Rings books, which you will see when you get to reading those, but it is certainly, it's just like you'll read a chapter or two without anything like that, and then he kind of inserts himself as the storyteller again.
Is that ever explained why? Like in any of the supplemental text about anything? Does anybody know if there's any reason why he does that? And I see Tag unmuting herself. I am prepared. Hit me with it.
It's just because it's a children's book.
Oh, okay.
When he was writing The Hobbit originally, it was like the original story came about from, bedtime stories to like Christopher and the kids and stuff. And so it's like, I assume he probably wrote them down, or the story, the way he kind of told it. So it's just that way because it's a kid's book, technically.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I saw you instantly unmute, and I was like, here it comes. I was like, if anybody knows it, anybody knows it.
Oh, and it's one other thing that I think is funny reading about the introduction to Gollum. It's like, deep down here by the water, dark water, lived old Gollum, a small slimy creature. I don't know where he came from, nor who or what he was. He was Gollum, as dark as darkness. And I'm like, oh, so that's the whole reason he wrote the Lord of the Rings trilogy, is so he could get to the backstory of who this Gollum was. That in this story, he's like, I don't know who he is. And then he had to come up with the whole story for it.
But in that line, I literally have that line pulled up like the moment you start reading. I was like, oh, that's at the top of my page. But do we know that is because, like, is that Bilbo speaking there, or is that Tolkien in the narrator mode?
I'm pretty sure that's narrator there.
Okay. Because I was gonna say, I was like, well, if Bilbo's talking in that part, then it's kind of like, well, it kind of makes sense that, like, he doesn't know who Gollum is, but I guess with the narrator, that's fair point of like he has to explain later on in the backstory. And I think if I remember correctly, in the special features of whichever of the movies, what's his name, Andy Serkis was like, yeah, it was kind of cool that I got to play Smeagol as, the little Hobbit character versus just being Gollum. He was like, it was really neat that we got to kind of actually like play that out, and everything. Like you kind of see like in the little interview he had of how excited he was, where he was like, oh, I get to actually be like standing up and like actually, be this character.
Because otherwise, there's only that one time you see a spittle, right? When they're cooking over the rabbit stew.
Yep.
And he's like, that's my spittle. I've seen those behind the scene things way too many times.
Yep.
And two, talking about the narrator mode versus just kind of the storytelling or Bilbo. In the first edition, he did not have the same plans for the ring that he did later. And actually went back and had to rewrite parts of it for later editions once he started Lord of the Rings. And basically, again, with that, the idea that this is all being translated from some old thing he found. The Hobbit is supposed to be Bilbo's account of this whole adventure he's on, which is why we don't, see how the dwarves escaped the goblins. We're just told they escaped in this way, that kind of thing, because Bilbo wasn't there. So when he made Smeagol originally, he did not necessarily have this whole backstory for Gollum when he wrote it the first time. And it wasn't until Lord of the Rings that he came back into the story later.
Yeah, now that you say that, I did remember reading that mine, I'm sure this is in most editions, so I'm not saying that mine is anything special, but mine is like note on the text, and it literally talks about chapter 5, which I had completely forgotten about because, you know, that was going to be with our original reading plan, that was going to be weeks down the line kind of thing, and here we are week 3 and we're already in it, which is great. No complaints. But I had forgotten about that, and then when you started talking, I was like, wait, I had read that, which I think is really cool, like, because it was yeah, September 37 was first published, and then 51, the second edition, 5th impression, contains a significantly revised portion of chapter 5. And to what you said, yeah, it's like, it's very neat. I'd be very intrigued. I would not pay the money to have a first generation, but I'd love to see what chapter 5 is in the original and like kind of compare.
I actually there's a free online version of the original publication. I think it's through archive.org. I actually stumbled upon it today because I was reading the last chapter while I was kind of out and about, and I was reading through it and I was like, oh, this is the original, this is not the updated version.
Okay.
So you can find free kind of like photocopies of the original. It's like 39 version.
Way cool. Way cool. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, the riddles were interesting, as like, you know, they were very like, I liked how like nervous at times Bilbo was, of like, oh, I really hope he doesn't get this because I don't want to be eaten, and then he'd get it and he was like, oh dang it, you know, and then he was like, okay, now I gotta make sure I answer this one, and like just to, you know, it was just interesting, like we're having a riddle war over, do we get to live or die?
Well, it wasn't so much a riddle war, but it was a sacred game. Like, he even mentions it in the text. Like, it's the ancient and sacred game of riddles. If you ask me a riddle, I ask you a riddle, and then whoever loses, well, at this point, like, yeah,
Oh
you
yes.
would get head.
Yep, I found it. Yep. Asking them and sometimes guessing them had been the only game he had ever played with other funny creatures sitting in their holes in the long, long ago, before he lost all of his friends and was driven away alone and crept down into the dark under the mountains. Which I guess, just reading that as well, there's almost like a little bit of Gollum backstory. A little bit is that he used to play this with friends, which Gollum had friends. Yeah.
Like, taking a look at the riddles, I'm you know, some of the riddles you can look at and you're like, okay, I kind of, well, having seen, of course, the movie, I kind of remember most of these, and I think every single one of these ended up in the movie. But they talk about no legs lay on one leg, 2 legs sat near on 3 legs, 4 legs got some. And he's saying, now it's not really the right time, but, you know, it was saying it was easy. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
That one just, you know, the others I can kind of see, but that one, there is no way. I'm sorry.
See, which one is that one? Is that later? Oh, I found it. Or no, I didn't. I was, yeah,
It's
like
a fish on a little table, a man at the table sitting on a stool, the cat has the bones. Oh yes, that I would have exactly gone there.
yeah. Yep. And that,
of course, is the right answer.
oh yes, absolutely. But that was what was interesting as well, of like I said before starting recording and stuff, was that it was very interesting to read the riddle, then hear, you know, obviously the narration of either Bilbo or Gollum's either talking or thinking or whatever the intermittent stuff is, or in between stuff, and then hearing the answer, and then it was like, wait, what? And then you went back and read it, and it was like, oh, like, oh, okay, you know, I could see that, you know. Yeah. But there are people even today that, you know, are just very good at riddles and thinking that way, and I definitely am not one of those people.
Yeah, I would just straight up die. I'm so bad at like
Yes.
wordplay like that and riddles.
Agreed.
I
I would just be
I
like,
always
take
think
me
of
now.
that. Yeah, with the riddles in the dark scene, I'm always just like, yeah, I would have just straight up been narked by Gollum in the.
Like, that's it. This is how I'm going. This is how I'm
Mhm.
going. We're dying by riddles, literally. Yeah. And then the whole the whole part at the end, the not riddle question, the where is
What
it?
have I got in my
Yep,
pocket?
yep,
Yeah.
yep. That whole thing where Gollum takes it to be a riddle, and Bilbo's like, oh, he's serious, like, kind of thing. And yeah, I don't know why. Again, I'm gonna go back to this, but I don't know why I have so many. Like, I even recently watched the three Hobbit movies semi recently, and yet some of these scenes, and this is skipping ahead a little bit, but when Bilbo is following Gollum out and he's got the ring on, I have this like very vivid image from the animated movie of that, and like that whole scene. I mean, I can't like picture it in my mind like second by second or anything, but again, it's just like things like that where I'm like, wow, like I haven't probably watched those movies, like those air quote original movies, even though they're probably not the originals. There's probably something before that or after it or whatever, it doesn't matter. But like watching those, being that was my first exposure to like film adaptation of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and stuff, and it's like, man, I haven't watched those movies in years, and yet I still can picture them. And it's like, wow, the book to movie translation was that good, at least in my mind. But I don't know why I had to jump that far or jump there, but I did anyways. Let's see. Yeah, that was just all interesting. The Gollum was like, you have string in your pocket. It's like, what are you gonna say, lint? Like, you have lint in your pocket. Ha! Technically, yes. But yeah. Let's see. Trying to find like my next like big point that I liked. Anybody has any comments about the this when he's searching for the ring and stuff?
My one thing that I liked is kind of what Tim mentioned, is after the whole when he asked the question like, what's in my pocket, and then he realizes that's not a riddle, and he knows he's like breaking a rule of like this sacred game. And it even says like he knew, of course, that the riddle game was sacred and of immense antiquity, and even wicked creatures were afraid to cheat when they played at it. And it goes on and says, but he felt like he felt like Gollum wouldn't keep his promise, and he wanted to kind of slide out of the game. And after all, that last question had not been a genuine riddle according to the ancient laws. And so Tim had kind of mentioned that earlier, but that was one of my favorite parts, was like, oh my god, so like this is not just like a guessing game, this is apparently like an ancient, well-known game among wicked creatures and hobbits and everybody.
I think that goes back to kind of like what Tolkien studied and like what he wrote about with like the book he wrote about fairies and like fairy lore and stuff like that, because like that's such an old European tradition within fairy lore and kind of like mythology, is that these riddle games are very, very sacred. And it's like, only some very, very wicked creature like a fairy is going to try and swindle you in a riddle game, and is trying gonna double cross you. And so he's got a lot of really interesting writings on like fairies and elves and brownies and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, I think that's probably the perspective he's writing it from, is that like Gollum is equivalent to a fairy in this situation, is something very much not to be trusted. It's this otherworldly creature that is definitely going to take your name and your soul.
That's a very good point, Civ. just scanning over looking for that line. I also found this funny where Gollum is like let's see. He thought this is Gollum speaking or thinking rather. He thought of all the things he kept in his own pockets, fish bones, goblin seed, you know, he lists all these things, right? And then he's like, he tried to think what other people kept in their pockets. And I'm like, I'm picturing Lord of the Rings Gollum, and I'm like, what pockets? This is like women's jeans pockets. Like, what pockets? You know, like, you know, I'm like, where does he have pockets? And so even if like the imagery is different, that Gollum in the book, you know, maybe has like actual clothes with actual, you know, if he did, I just had this image of like, you know, Lord of the Rings, you know, Gollum with teeny tiny little loincloth, and it's like, what pockets? What pockets?
So if it, my book is older than the Lord of the Rings movies, and it's illustrated, and Gollum is only wearing a loincloth as well, if that makes you feel better. So
those must be some magical pockets to hold all of that.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, I had to look, and I'd be like, is my book older than the movies? Yes, it is.
excellent.
And yeah, it's illustrated, so it's got several pictures of Gollum, and he has no pants. So
Excellent. He's got some magical pockets then. Mystical pockets.
Makes me think of how women's pockets used to be incorporated in clothing, where it was like, you know, you wear your like your drawers and then your chemise, and then it's basically just like a little string you tie around your waist with like the two little pockets on your hips,
Yep.
and then you put the layers over top of it. So like in my brain, it's this little loincloth string, but he's got two little square pockets.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Oh man. That's fantastic. Oh man. Oh gosh, now I can't get that in.
Just his little thong, like his little loincloth thong with two little pockets.
Oh gosh. Oh gosh. Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Let's see.
You know, one of the things that, of course, I'm always looking at as I read through this book is I'm thinking, you know, wait, the movies didn't get this right or whatever. And, you know, I'm going back to the very beginning of when Gollum first meets Baggins, and he is introduced as, hi, I'm Mr. Bilbo Baggins, lost the dwarves, lost the wizards, blah, blah, blah. I never see him where he says he's from the Shire, whereas in the movie, that's what they get out of torturing Gollum, right, is only two words, Baggins and Shire. And he never said Shire, so where'd he get that from? The stupid things that I think of when I read this stuff.
I would actually assume that that's because Gollum / Smeagol is technically sort of a hobbit. That maybe because, you know, like the people that he came from are hobbit adjacent, that maybe he would have had knowledge from his pre-Gollum life. That maybe like hobbit, so maybe that's where, you know, hobbits come from. That might be a stretch, but it's like I would probably assume that's where the knowledge came from.
Well, and this is complete, you know, firing from the hip here guess too, is like I would assume that as well, but also it's like if the Baggins were as famous in the Hobbit world as, you know, the first like chapter kind of claimed, is that even if Smeagol wasn't like from, you know, their neighborhood kind of thing, it's like he might know who they are from kind of like a, you know, kind of like how you know who the Vanderbilts are, or the, you know, like they're just like one of those names. Maybe, I don't know, that's just me completely firing from the hip there. But to tag on to Tag's point. That's a real knee slapper. Okay. Let's see. I'm just like skimming over my stickies.
I
one other thing that I mean, this is related to this chapter, but reading Riddles in the Dark and then reading the next chapter, I didn't quite grasp how long they're like under the mountain, but it's like 3 days. Like he's wandering around in the dark down there for like 3 days. And I always thought it was more like 1 day, but it's like, I forget when they like calculate it in the next chapter. It's like 60 some or 70 hours.
Which makes it extra funny when Bilbo's like, I'm really hungry, and Gandalf's like, suck it up.
Yeah.
I'm starving.
Yeah.
Without even maggoty bread.
Well, there's the line, wait, this is skipping to the very, very end of chapter 6, but I did highlight it because I found it very funny. But speaking to that, is there the like at the very end, you know, Gandalf's like, but in the meantime, we are famished with hunger, and then Bilbo comes in, I am nearly dead of it. Like, you know, it's just, you know, said Bilbo in a weak little voice that nobody heard. You know, so it's like talking to the Lord of the Eagles and stuff like that. It's just, again, that's like, yeah. It's like Bilbo's over here half dead for a hobbit. You know, he's like, I haven't eaten.
Well, I'd be half dead too if I hadn't eaten in like 72 hours.
Very true. Very true. But also hobbit meals.
And he still just barely made it out the door, right? His buttons got stuck on there trying to get to the door. If he was if he had eaten anything that previous 3 days, he may not have fit.
Oh my goodness. Oh,
Very true.
oh my goodness.
Well, you also have to take into account like the level of comfort he's accustomed to. Like any inconvenience would just absolutely feel like the worst thing to him.
Yep. Ever since Yoren mentioned this, I think in like week 1's meeting, where he talked, I think it was week 1's meeting, where he talked about how much Bilbo references, you know, home, or like longing for his this, or dreaming of the breakfast, or his, you know, whatever, right? I've definitely started to pay particular attention to that, and that's like literally in the first, it's in the first first indented paragraph of the chapter, and everything. And so yeah, like he definitely, like you said, like it's like, I'm without this thing, you know.
Which is so funny because it's like I can so imagine that being Tolkien during the war. You know, it's like you come from this countryside English life and at being at Oxford and all this stuff, and then you're in the trenches in Europe, and you're like, I miss my armchair, and I miss warm food, and I miss home, and this is terrible. Like you can just so see like these, especially the British officers that would have been used to better lives, you know, being in the trenches in World War I and being like, I miss my armchair and my books.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
No, like just at the beginning of Riddles in the Dark, when he's talking about how fortunate he was that his pipe hadn't broken and he had tobacco, but he didn't have a match, and just that seemingly almost broke him.
Yeah.
It's the silly things like that, because it's just the comfort of home that he could have taken on the road, but he didn't have a match.
Yeah, it's just like, the world is ending. I don't have a match. I did like this little realization when for me it's on page 79, but it's when Bilbo realizes that the ring makes him invisible. It was just, you know, because I mean, again, I don't really remember the movies all that well because I haven't watched them nearly as much as I've watched the trilogy, but you know, it's like you find a ring and it's just like, oh, it's a ring, and to Gollum it's special, okay, but then it's like you know, he has this realization of like, oh, I am invisible, you know, like wow, you know, kind of thing. And I think, isn't there also, is it this part? I don't know if it was here or if there was another part where doesn't he make, I feel like I remember him making some comment of like, you know, my job just got infinitely easier, or like he didn't realize that it, you know, there was something, I vaguely remember there being some line like that. I think somewhere in this book there is this line. But then it's, you know, like Bilbo then, you know, kind of not outsmarts Gollum, but the whole thing of like, well, Gollum might try and like, you know, track me to the exit. Let me just follow him, you know, and it's, what does he do? Exactly that. Yeah. And then, let's see.
I have a question for you guys.
Hit us with it.
Yeah. And maybe this is like looking too far ahead into like Lord of the Rings, which I've only ever seen the movies also. But part of me is always like, Bilbo, you should have just killed Gollum.
Yes! Yes! I thought the same thing! Yes. Yes.
He did, like, I know in Lord of the Rings, lead them through that, you know, shortcut. But reading this, I'm just like, dude, this thing wanted to eat you.
Yeah.
It would
I'm
certainly
curious
make
what
him
other
a lot
people
less
think.
sympathetic as a character, though, I think, for a children's book.
Yeah.
That's fair.
I think too, I read somewhere talking about Lord of the Rings and why the hobbits are important in that story is that they don't necessarily approach things the way the rest, like the world of man would, the way us do, where, you know, that kind of small mercy for Gollum is a commonplace thing for them. They're not after, you know, victory and power and success. They want their calm little place to sit and be comfortable. And kind of that ultimately is what is the undoing for Sauron later, is that you have this group of people who he wrote off because they don't go out and kill people and adventure and do these things. So I think in part, him not killing Gollum has lots of implications in Lord of the Rings, but also just kind of plays to the character that they are different and more kind of casual and easygoing and merciful and laid back and not interested in trouble and that kind of thing, more so than anybody else.
As soon as possible.
Well, that's very interesting.
I'm terrified to speak to the police about
Let's see.
Hey, I just wanted to pop in for a second. I've got to get rolling
Oh, you're
in the
good.
morning. So, it's good to hear you guys.
Always good to hear from you.
Nice to hear from you, bud.
Man. All right. I'll see you in a few months, I guess. It's getting close.
Absolutely.
And maybe next week.
Hey, it's all
Sooner
good.
than you think.
Yeah. All right. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, you're
Okay.
fine. You're fine. See ya.
Yeah, because sometimes rating happens.
Absolutely. I actually did use that as part of my stream title the other night, as I was like, what did I don't know, I mentioned something to that effect. Classic. I love that that's become just such a thing. Let's see. Just trying to like, so we like the end of this chapter, I feel like is just kind of like obviously Bilbo reconvening with everybody. And like making it past the goblins, obviously, and to
Do we
more.
want to just skip to the next one?
Yeah, this end is kind of just like him like getting out, right? So it's kind of just like,
Yeah.
Okay. Chapter 6. I also loved that there was an explanation about the out of the frying pan and into the fire in this chapter. I was gonna mention that very early on, but I was like, no, let's wait till we actually get to chapter 6. I loved that. Just similarly to the golf comment and the football comment in the previous chapters, is the, he's like, I'm gonna see if I can find it really, really fast. Oh yeah, here it is. For me, it's on page 91. What shall we do? What shall we do? He cried. Escaping goblins to be caught by wolves, he said, and it became a proverb, though we now say out of the frying pan into the fire in the same sort of uncomfortable situations. I was just like, that's awesome. It was just fun and cool. I did have a tag question here in this chapter when I was reading, similarly to my comment a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, I don't remember, about like how it says like Gandalf's wand, is that, it's reference in here of wolves. And I do remember this whole scene of them like going up the trees and stuff in the Peter Jackson movies, and stuff, but it's like they mention the wargs and everything. But it's like, are these actually all wargs like the movie shows where all of them have riders? Or is it like some of them are wolves and some of them are just like, is the warg the animal and rider combo? Or is the warg just the wolf creature? That's a couple questions, I know, but.
I think I always assumed it was the wolf because in the Silmarillion you kind of get introduced to the wolves in Middle Earth, and there's like, the Great Wolf, and these wolves are kind of bit larger characters, kind of like the eagles are in this. And they're referred to as wargs, and they definitely don't have riders in that instance.
Okay.
I assume it's kind of like, I think he even mentions it in chapter 6 that's what they call the wolves in like the East or something like that. Like in certain parts of Middle Earth, it's like they use warg for like, kind of like the dark wolves that fight for the ill forces.
Oh, okay. And that go ahead, Siv, sorry.
I'd say, like, I found it, they say on me it's page 95, but I don't, who knows what that means for you. But it says, but even the wild wargs, for so the evil wolves over the edge of the world were named, cannot climb trees. So, like, they're just evil wolves who live on this side of the edge of the wild.
Yeah, because like in maybe it's Lord of the Rings, or I don't even remember which of his writings, like he establishes there are just wolves in Middle Earth that aren't the more sentient, kind of ill-serving wolves. So I would assume the wargs are just very much the wolves with ill intent.
Okay.
Yeah, so I actually have a definitive answer on that one. The wargs are actually a sentient dire wolf sort of creature.
Oh.
They are just larger, like sentient evil wolves.
Okay, cool. And that also makes sense. Sorry.
Tim, because they talk about how they talk, right? How they have their own like language, right?
Yeah.
I actually, when I was a kid, I got encyclopedia on Tolkien, and I would read that thing voraciously. And I remember looking that up because I loved the idea of goblin wolf riders when I was a little kid.
Makes sense.
Tim, do you remember if they all come from the Great Wolf in the Silmarillion, or if it's like in general? I can never like remember if it's kind of like they almost like Ungoliant, where they all stem from the one. Do you remember if it was the first or just...
I do believe the wargs do come from that.
Okay, I was gonna say I almost feel like that's with the Ungoliant, where they all come from. I can't even remember his name now, but like the one that Baron winds up fighting.
Yeah, I do believe so. It's been forever.
Interesting. And that also makes sense because in the movie when Sauron it would be Two Towers, when he's like, send out your warg riders, that'd be
Saruman, yeah.
Or Saruman, sorry. I always brain fart. Sometimes I get them backwards. But even though they're very different, just like I have to think between Arwen and Eowyn sometimes, like, you're just like, when you're just spitting it out very quickly, it's like wait a minute. Even though obviously again they are very different characters. But when Saruman is saying that, is that he's like sending out your, the warg, or is it wargs, or like WORG? Or are there more letters or less letters? I don't know, whatever. But he says...
I thought it was WARG, warg.
Oh, well, either way. But it's... Yeah, okay. Yeah. But then it's like, he's like, send out your warg riders, and it's like, okay, well, that also kind of backs up the claim of it's the creature and not the combo. And everything. And... Yeah, but yeah, so then I think I kind of found maybe what I was trying to reference a little bit earlier, not verbatim, but the when Bilbo like steps out to all of the dwarves, and like surprises them and everything, like this whole like, if they had still doubted that he was really a first-class burglar in spite of Gandalf's words, they doubted no longer. So it's like, he just like appeared. And so it's just more affirmation of like, Bilbo as who he is, but then it's like he gets the ring, and it's like, oh, well now there's no doubt. And let's see.
One of my favorite parts of this chapter was finding out or relearning that eagles can be jerks.
Yes.
And that these were good ones, that they're kind of, the exception. And it's like, it says, eagles are not kindly birds. Some are cowardly and cruel. And I had always in my head thought of these eagles as these like great majestic creatures. And it's like, no, these are just the exception to the rule.
Yep. It's crazy to me, like, of course this is like a statement for like books in general, especially ones that have movie adaptations, but well, actually especially the ones that have the movie adaptations, it's like, it's so crazy how much more can be fit, like backstory and like extra things into the book version, because like, there's not enough time, right, to they can't fit in as much obviously into a movie to like tell all the backstory and all the so let's see, anybody else have, I'm skimming for like things that I was like that jumped out at me. Anybody else have any comments on this chapter?
I like how in the book, I feel like in the movie, a lot of times there's always that joke of, well, why didn't the eagle just fly them to the lonely mountain? And then here it kind of talks about why they don't. Like they that Gandalf kind of like, tries to persuade them to take them as far as they will, and they kind of have, a discussion about how far they'll take them. Because they're afraid they'll get like shot down by humans and dwarves because they steal their sheep all the time. But that's just something I like, a comment I hear about the movie a lot, so it was kind of nice to like read the reasoning in the book.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, because I think that's literally something we talked about in one of the earlier like meetings, was like, why did the eagles not just fly them straight there? And then ta-da, answer. Let's see. So, okay, here's another Tag and Tim question. Is so the white goblin dude, the really bad one in the movies, whose name I don't remember right now, is he not in the books at all?
Azog is only mentioned in the book because he had died.
Oh. So like all of the everything with Thorin and everything like that, like, isn't true, or like how much of it is true? Like, from what's said in the movie, rather.
So a lot of it is true, but it's kind of built upon. It's so Azog is dead, and his son Bolg is leading the goblins later on. Yeah.
Okay. Because I had a vague recollection, because like this is the whole scene, like this whole scene in the movie, like this whole, you know, them up the trees and the eagles rescuing them and all this stuff. It's like this was like such a big scene in the movie, and it was just like, wait a minute, where's what's his name? You know, where's what's his name? And I like, it kind of took me back to when the movies first came out, and it was like there was this whole, I feel like there was this whole thing of like he's not in the books, at least not in like the same capacity that he is in the movies. And so it's just you know, interesting.
That wasn't entirely done for cinematic purposes to give a driving villain.
Makes sense.
Because there's no chief antagonist in this, because it's them just going on an adventure. Like the closest thing to a chief antagonist would be Smaug, but you barely see Smaug.
Yeah, that's a good point.
One part I liked about the section where it's talking about the Eagles is when Bilbo's like, I know what a piece of bacon feels like when it is suddenly picked out of the pan on a fork and put back on the shelf. And the response says, no, you don't, because the bacon knows it'll get back in the pan sooner or later. Yeah, you don't want to be the bacon, apparently.
Not untrue.
I do like bacon.
Oh, funnily enough, since you brought up Azog, I actually met the actor who played him, and I have a signed picture of Azog in my house.
Oh, way cool. I don't remember if I posted it, since we're on that little like derailment for 2 seconds. I don't remember if I posted it or not, but I did see something that came up on my Facebook about, you know, from like one of those like air quotes sponsored, you know, Lord of the Rings fan groups or whatever. But apparently Azog in the movie, like the original statue rendering of him, his like loincloth battle skirt thing is actually that of like a dwarf's face. Like it's like you know, it's like an actual dwarf's face that he like peeled off and turned into like a garment of clothing. And
it's several dwarf faces stitched together. Yeah.
Yeah, and they when they were thinking about it, they were like, this is a little too gruesome, like a little too much, you know, and so then in the movie that's not there, but apparently like the original statue renderings, like, you know, models or whatever, like still has it. And I was like, oh, that's very interesting. Like, just, you know, again, just since we went on that little derailment train for 2 seconds, I was like, oh wait, I saw this thing. So oh yes, Civ, I found the quote you're talking about the I actually did highlight it as like a character building / world building kind of thing about the Eagles not always being like the best. Let's see. Anybody else have like jumping out things?
One of the things I find funny in chapter 6 is it Nori that completely like just gets the blame for everything, like for dropping Bilbo down in the caverns, and then for not just dragging him up the tree initially. That Gandalf just kind of like verbally abuses him through the chapter for it.
I did write down one part. I think it's let's see. Nori to Dory said, "You've left the burglar behind again," said Nori to Dory, looking down. I can't be always carrying burglars on my back," said Dory. "Down tunnels and up trees. What do you think I am, a porter?" So So
But you're right. He's the one that has to get out of the tree when the wolves are coming to help Bilbo up, and he's the one whose leg was getting pulled as they were flying away from the eagles, and Bilbo was hanging on to Dory's leg after having not eaten for 3 days and having been stuck in the tree for a while. That's some impressive strength there.
yeah, no kidding.
I
Absolutely.
love that he does get a brief aside, like with that description of how he finally gets down and he stands there and he lets Bilbo like kind of clamber up him to get into the tree. And Tolkien kind of does one of those little narrator moments that's kind of like, to his benefit, and to his proof of character. He stands there and basically just like lets the wolf like run straight at him while Bilbo climbs him to get up in the tree.
Yep. Oh, excuse me. Well, yeah, and like the goblins were singing in this chapter as well, which I think we talked about last week as well, that the goblins sang in last week's chapters too, right? And that the they're like burn down the trees and bake and toast them, fry and roast them.
Boil them, mash them, stick them in a stew. Oh wait, wrong section.
Yeah, but music is a big motif of a lot of Tolkien's work because it was so common to use in like Anglo-Saxon poetry where you'd have it recited as song half the time. And that was what he was really versed in, so you'd have a lot of that. And also, this being ostensibly a children's book versus the later books, you have more of it, though it still exists in the other books.
Sure. Let's see. I'm actually gonna write or highlight that the bacon quote. Yeah, there it is. See. Oh wait. Oh, this. Oh wait, I remember reading this part, like this whole Oh, now I'm like stumbling over what this like the. Hold on. There's this line at the top of 101, at least in my book. Oh, here we go. It like literally explains it in like a 2 paragraphs down. But like this one eagle was talking about, excuse me, the Lord of Eagles bids you to bring your prisoners to the great shelf, he cried, and was off again, and the other blah 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 blah. Then Bilbo was thinking he had just strength to wonder what the messenger had meant by air quote prisoners, and to begin to think of being torn up for supper like a rabbit when his own turn came. Then we scroll down like a paragraph and a half, and then like let's see, so you see prisoners had meant prisoners rescued from the goblins only and not captives of the eagles. And it was just like, it's like such a little thing, but I found that very interesting, that it was like, yeah, this eagle's coming up to them and is like, prisoners, and you're like, wait, so the eagles are taking us prisoner? Why? But then it's no, they were prisoners to the goblins. And then like the next paragraph down is the line that we were talking about why the eagles wouldn't take wouldn't take them to the Misty Mountain and everything. Yeah. Oh no, I felt, like I said, like I felt like this was let's see, because, well, here at the very, very end, I know I'm like kind of fumbling here, but here at the very end, like so ended the adventures of the Misty Mountains. And again, he kind of talks about his home at the end, because he's like, soon Bilbo's stomach was feeling full and comfortable again, and he felt he could sleep contentedly. Sorry, I had sticky note half covering some of the letters. Though really he would have liked a loaf and butter better than bits of meat toasted on sticks. He slept curled up on the hard rock more soundly than ever he had done on his feathered bed in his own little hole at home. But all night he dreamed of his own house and wandered in his sleep into all his different rooms, looking for something that he could not find nor remember what it looked like. So, like, are they saying, like, so ended the adventures of the Misty Mountains? Is that just because of all of the traversing they did, like, through the Misty Mountain range? Even though, obviously, we're not at the Misty Mountains yet. Or the Misty... Or we're not the mountain. Is that what they're referring to? It's just, like, all of their traversing?
I kind of just took that as kind of like almost as part of like the fact that it's like a children's book kind of thing, like telling like the kids that, you know, they're done with like kind of this section of the story, like it's now moving on into the next part of the story. I feel like that's a very like oratory kind of statement, and it's like, and now we're done, you know, with the Misty Mountains and kind of looking ahead. That's just how I took it.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
I think too, like from the map and everything, now that they are through the Misty Mountains, so they're done with that portion of the journey. They're moving on now to, you know, Mirkwood, and then eventually on to the Lonely Mountain and all that stuff. So they're basically, I thought that part was just saying like, all right, guys, they did it. They made it through the Misty Mountains.
Oh, I see. So very much.
Specifically, the Misty Mountains are that region, that mountain range. So it was the adventures there, which to this point had been their most perilous adventure.
Very true. And like you said, it's like very much a closing of a chapter, closing of that part, and everything. So that's a good point. Cool. Well, I definitely like I said, I this week's chapters were a little bit of a struggle for me to read. I don't know why. It could have been any number of things, but definitely hearing the different explanations about things, and like again the continued backstory knowledge and other things like that definitely has helped like kind of clear some things up, but also bring things more into like, oh, that's kind of a big deal, or oh, this is more meaningful than, you know, we thought, or whatever. So always appreciate the good discussion and everything. And I know that we will be discussing in, you know, we'll talk in the chat after this is over about what we want to read for this week and everything, but good reading, guys. And, so if nobody else has any final comments, anybody, any closing comments about these two chapters? Nothing? Okay.
No, nothing.
Excellent. All right. Well, that concludes week 3's group meeting. Yay! I'm gonna get this wrapped up on my end, and you know, you guys can feel free to do whatever you want, but I'm gonna go wrap this up. Thank you guys, as always. Love learning about everything and hearing everybody else's, like, you know, favorite moments, favorite parts, and everything. I think that at least for me, it brings even more things into light of like, oh, I didn't notice that, or whatever. So I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. And I appreciate all of you guys for being willing to read through this book with me. So I will catch you guys later. I'm going to go send everybody off. So bye, friends.
Bye.
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 Auf Wiedersehen.
Alrighty, guys. So that concludes week 5's, not week 5's, we're in chapter 5. Week 3's reading, group meeting, readings of chapter 5 and 6, group meeting for chapter 5 and 6. Oh my gosh. I just love learning all the backstory knowledge and everything. It definitely brings so much more interest to these chapters. Like, yes, I'm reading this book just like everybody else, but the knowledge that people have is just mind-blowing about all the backstory stuff. So I appreciate everybody watching these videos, and I appreciate everybody hanging out with us and everything. I will be back recording my personal reading later this week. I'm assuming we will probably be reading chapter 7 and chapter 8, but I will touch base with my friends in our chat to discuss what we're going to read for this week. But yeah, appreciate it. If you've made it this far in the YouTube video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Trying to grow every single day, every single video. So I appreciate everybody, and yeah, I'll see you guys later this week. Have a great one.